Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another full access webinar from Full Compass, where we bring you the industry experts to talk about the subjects that you'd like to hear about. Just before we get started today, just a few housekeeping things while people are logging in. We see several people still logging in. We are recording this, so you will have access to that. Also, we have a question and answer feature. Feel free to type in your questions at any time during the webinar, and then we will hopefully get our guests to answer those. We should anyway. We will also be sending out right away is a survey about your experience within the industry. So we're going to send that out right away as we kick things off. And today it is the art of voiceover, perfecting the sound for your craft. And we have a very special guest once again. My pleasure to introduce Mr. Jonathan Ruest. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey, Jim, how's it going?
It's going well. How are things out in sunny California?
They are pretty great here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having Neumann. And, thank you to all the guests for showing up and having us here and, letting us kind of engage on this level.
Yeah, and special thanks to all the other people joining us from the previous webinars that have been following the series that we have here. It's great to have you guys back. Hopefully we have plenty more coming up in the future. Yeah. So, Jonathan, we are here to talk about art of voiceover, and I know you've prepared just a wonderful presentation. Before we dig into that, can you just give us a little background on yourself and experience in the industry?
Absolutely. So for those joining in, what I'm currently doing is I'm the head of sales and business development for Neumann microphones for the Americas. Neumann is part of Sennheiser Group. So Sennheiser and Neumann are one family, and I've been with this family for 10 years this August. But my audio journey started when I was in middle school, sitting in studios while my sister was recording a record, and then going on to school for audio. But my journey with voiceover actually started when I was in college with audio, where I interned at an organization that did audiobook recording for people who are hard of vision. They had a hard time reading, so it was very early audiobook days. So I realized actually on the last webinar, I remembered that my kind of foray into audio started with voiceover, and I've done a whole journey of recording music, audio post, all sorts of audio roles, and working for other manufacturers. So brings us to where we are today.
Awesome. It's a pleasure to have you. I learned a lot of things myself personally in the last couple of webinars that we've had, and I'm sure I'm going to learn some more today.
Absolutely.
So hopefully everybody's out there filling out that survey that we have out there. We already have questions coming in, so
great.
Why don't we just...
Oh boy.
Yeah, right. Here we go. Why don't we just go ahead and dive right into it, Jonathan? Whenever you're ready to do that. Wait, before you kick in, can I see some of the survey results here? We have, the questions are, how long have you been a voiceover artist? And we have 43% of our audience is just starting.
Great.
And the next highest one is 20%, is 10 plus years. So we have everything in between that we have there. And then as far as doing mixing voiceover projects, we have 43% less than a year, and 5 to 10 years, we're at 33% of our audience. So we have some good experience here, all levels.
Absolutely, great mix there, and it's also really encouraging to see such a high percentage of newcomers to the field, because the voiceover community is just amazing. It's a super strong community. So welcome to those who are just starting in your journey.
Yes, we've noticed that trend greatly here at Full Compass as well. A lot of people getting involved in that. So let's fire right into it, shall we?
All right. The topic is the art of voiceover. And this is perfecting your sound craft number 2. It says number 2 because this is the second presentation in a series that we've been doing with Full Compass. But I do want to preface this that this is actually really version 1.5. And why I say that is we're going to I'm going to go over the agenda in a moment, but we're going to largely cover most of the same topics, but we're going to go a little bit deeper. And hearing those survey results and hearing how many are new and how many are experienced, I think we're going to be able to cover a little bit of good for everyone. So that's really great. So let's jump right into it here. So again, presented by us here at Neumann and our good friends at Full Compass. So before I get into the kind of nuts and bolts of this presentation, I'll just give you a very brief 2-slide history of Neumann and where we are, and sort of why we're here presenting with you today. So to kick it off, we're old. 1928, we were founded. We produced a product called the CMV3, nicknamed the Neumann bottle. If you take a look at that photo there, you can kind of make some guesses to why. And this was actually the first ever mass-produced condenser microphone. So if you're doing any math, we're coming up on 100 years here, just in a few short years. And that whole time, we've been trying our best to innovate and deliver products that help you guys be more creative and get your job done. One other little interesting tidbit here, we invented phantom power. Not necessarily the concept of phantom power. The technology was mostly taken from some telecom industry and how to power over long lines. But in the 60s, we were working with a German broadcaster, NWDR, and they were trying to find a way to standardize power delivery for microphones. Prior to that, it was kind of more like your standard tube microphone that if you have any studio experience, you've seen a mic, and then the cable goes to a big brick-sized power supply, and then it goes on out to your console or mic preamp. And the idea that the mic preamp would actually provide power, the 48-volt standard was developed by Neumann alongside this broadcaster. So that's just an interesting tidbit of, again, really where Neumann comes from, and that we've been on the forefront of recording technologies for now almost 100 years, and hopefully for the next 100 years as well. Getting into what we're going to talk about today, and why I'm saying that this is really version 1.5 here. So this is not necessarily in order, it kind of is, but we're going to do a little bit of a recap of part 1. That includes signal chain considerations. We're going to talk about polar patterns. We're going to talk about different types of mics. We're going to get into a concept that I hear all the time at voiceover trade shows is what is noise floor? How do I deal with my noise floor? If you don't know what that is, if you're new, don't worry, we're going to cover it in a little bit. That's why it's on the agenda. Another one, I'm going to talk a bit about distortion, and that is pertaining to your ability to record clean audio. We're going to go into mic placement, talk about careers in voiceover, revisit microphone selection, and we're going to end with some final thoughts and some Q&A. The Q&A is at the end, but that's not, the Jim is going to be asking me questions throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, don't wait till the end. Feel free to ask it throughout the presentation, but if there are a buildup of questions or some time at the end, we'll field questions then. So can take a sip of water and we'll jump into this. Oh, and for those wondering, I'm speaking into a Neumann TLM 103 today.
And
Jim was as well.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So one more housekeeping thing. Watch out. You're going to see these little icons throughout the presentation. This is a good opportunity to take some notes. I mean, the whole presentation is a good opportunity to take some notes, but these are usually some sort of little extra piece of information or a tidbit that you might find useful. So get your notebooks ready, get your pens ready, watch out for those, and maybe you'll learn something you didn't know. All right. When I was going through the agenda, I talked about signal chain considerations. I talked about noise floor. I talked about all these things. And when you look at this image that's in the background of this here, you really see a full signal chain. And actually, I'll go to the more clear one again for a moment. You really see a full signal chain. The reason why I start this presentation with this image is, yes, Neumann is the microphone company. We've been building microphones for 100 years. Of course, now we make headphones and monitors and audio interfaces and all these other things, but really the takeaway from this image should be that your system is the sum of all of its parts, right? And your system includes headphones and audio interface It includes a microphone. It also includes the most important instrument that you have, which is your own voice. So the concept of this series and the concept of this presentation is to be thinking about your holistic system, how they work together, how you understand how they work together, and making sure you're delivering the best performance and the best product. So getting into signal chain considerations. We're actually going to start with the audio interface because this really is the heart of your voiceover home studio. And when I talk about audio interfaces, really I want to dig into interface specifications. So I'm going to read these off here. I'm going to show you a comparative example, then we're going to dig into a few of these specifications. But when we use the word professional, we're not using that word because it's a marketing term. We use it because there are professional standards of which products are measured. And understanding those professional standards and why they exist will help you get the best signal. So when looking at audio interfaces, the most important considerations are mic pregain, dynamic range, which dynamic range really is an indicator of the fidelity and audio quality of your performance. We'll talk about that more in a second. Max input and output levels. THD plus noise, that is the abbreviation for total harmonic distortion plus noise. The number of channels that are in the audio interface. You may find that for some reason you want to use two different style microphones. You might learn why a little bit later, as well as having a powerful headphone amp. These are really the things that you should be looking for when purchasing an audio interface. But you might at this point be asking, how do I know, right? What do these mean? So doing a quick side-by-side here, you can see on the right side is the Neumann MT48. On the left side is my very bad photoshopping ability to draw another audio interface. You may know what it is. Use your own imagination there, but the intent of this is just to show that there is a range of available options and that they have different specifications. So when choosing a product, to understand what they are, right? So first, I'm just going to go through these specs, then we'll jump into what they mean. So looking at the one on the left, mic pregain 57 dB. On the right, MT48 78 dB. Dynamic range 113 versus 136 dB. For those who are familiar with the logarithmic scale and how decibels work, that is a significant difference. It's not a little bit difference, it's multiple times the difference, right? Max input and output +9 versus +24, max output +16 versus +24, and then total harmonic distortion plus noise, -100 versus -110. So you can see that there's a pretty big difference between the two. Getting into what that means. Dynamic range is really the one that I want to start with. These are broad definitions here just to kind of paint an idea and an understanding of what they are. So dynamic range refers to the difference in decibels between the quietest sound it can capture above its noise floor and the loudest sound it can handle without distortion. Where that's really relevant for voiceover is especially in voice acting, where you're going to have really loud parts, really quiet parts. You need to capture all the nuance of it. And you don't want to be changing mic pregain in between because you're clipping, because your interface does not have a lot of dynamic range. The max input and output level. This is one that goes really glossed over very often because most people don't understand why it's relevant to them. And why it's relevant is that professional equipment is designed to operate at certain levels. So thinking back to that specification chart, the max input and output of an MT48 is +24 dBu. Most professional studio monitors are also expecting that same signal level. So if you have a product that its max output is significantly lower than that, what you can actually put yourself in a situation of is that you're sending your speaker lower of a signal than it's looking for. So now you have to turn up the volume on your speakers, which makes the amps work harder, which brings up the noise, increases distortion, and actually makes your audio worse. So thinking about how the signal should go into a device, what level it should be at as it goes through the device, and what level it should be at when it comes out will help make sure that your system is operating the way that it should. Expanding a bit here on total harmonic distortion plus noise, right? So this is a measure of the amount of unwanted harmonic distortion and noise relative to the original signal. A lower value indicates cleaner and more accurate audio reproduction. So going back to that side by side, the left-hand side was at minus 100 dB, the MT48 minus 110 dB. The lower number means there's less noise, right? I'm not going to touch on number of channels or powerful headphone amp at this section. We'll learn more about that a little bit later. But just kind of bringing that back to this image, you can see that there's a pretty significant difference between these two products. And this isn't to be a selling point on an MT48 versus another product. Just to help give you an idea that there's a standard for what is considered to be professional signal levels. And then there are other products. Now, there are other products that are definitely be able to get the job done, but it's important to know what the limitations are and what the challenges are, so that way as you're going through your voiceover journey, you know what things to look out for and what might be bottlenecks in your signal chain. The next, we're going to talk about the DAW. This is the next thing that is really sort of the secondary heart, I should say here. Most DAW will work. The best one is the one that you're comfortable with. And I say that because whenever I do a conference or a training or I'm at a VO event, I get asked, should I use Pro Tools? Should I use Audacity? Is it okay that I use Logic? They're all fine. Again, the best one is the one you're most comfortable with, because with voiceover work, much like music, the best performance is the one that you are the most comfortable doing. And usually you're more comfortable performing when you're comfortable with your equipment, right? So if you're using a DAW that you're really having a hard time figuring out how to operate, then move to one that's simpler for you to use. Worry about figuring out the other one later. Really, it's about being comfortable in your recording process and taking that layer off. The next thing I'll say is, when you are using a DAW, though, really, really critically important to understand your metering. And why do I say that, right? So here's one of these tip moments. Most audio interfaces, this is kind of a nerdy topic here. Most audio interfaces have a reference level of between minus 16 dBFS and minus 18 dBFS. What that is if you look at these two meters on the right side here, the left one is from Logic, the right one is from Pro Tools. You can see a bunch of numbers next to the meters, starting with 0 at the top. That's 0 dBFS, and then everything below that is minus from that. So minus 3, minus 6, minus 9, whatever. The reference level would say, if you ever think of an old analog recording console with the VU meter that kind of bounces around, there's a 0 on that. This is saying that if something is at 0 VU, then it'll be at either minus 16 or minus 18 in your software. There is no standard. Every audio interface company kind of picks their own reference number, and some really high-end audio interfaces let you choose the reference number. But why this is relevant is to understand if you're even recording at the right level. A lot of times people will say, I'm going to record up until it's red and then back it off a little bit. It's not necessarily the best practice, because if you see here, these two meters, Logic and Pro Tools, those signals look dramatically different. I did my best to scale them to look about the same size. It's not perfect, but you can see that minus 16 on Logic, the left side one, is visually much higher than minus 16 on the Pro Tools one. And it's not because the signal is different. It's because the scale of the meters are different. So if you were constantly recording in Logic and then you decided to make a switch to Pro Tools, you might think your signal is too low, so then you turn your gain up more to have a similar reference of where you thought the signal was before. In doing that, you're turning up all the noise in your mic pre, you're bringing up all the noise in your room, and you're actually making your sound quality potentially worse. So really understanding your metering, what is supposed to be a nominal signal level, is going to help you get the cleanest recordings. All right, the fun topic. Polar patterns. I get this question about this all the time. People learn what polar patterns are. We're going to start with learning that. But then they ask why this is relevant for voiceover. I'm just talking into a microphone, right? I'm not doing music. Why is this relevant? So we're going to learn that. For those who are not sure yet, what is a polar pattern? A polar pattern describes how the microphone picks up from different directions. Think of it as the microphone's field of hearing. Knowing that it tells how it picks up from different directions, it also tells you where it naturally rejects sound. And for those who are building home studios, that's a critically important part that we will discover more a little bit later in the presentation. If you haven't seen this chart on the right side yet, this is a visual representation of a polar pattern. You can see the top of the microphone I have indicating as the front, the brighter side with no shadow. The bottom is the back. You can see this little heart-shaped but rounded bold section in this graph. This is a cardioid polar pattern. It's saying that it picks up from the front and rejects from the back. And that's how you read that chart. Another quick tip, a tighter polar pattern is more susceptible to a phenomenon called proximity effect. We have a whole section on proximity effect later in the deck, but keep that in mind. If you're familiar with what it is already, awesome. When talking about polar patterns, there's really a handful of common ones. Cardioid is the most popular. That is the polar pattern we're seeing here on the right side. Then there's super and hypercardioid, figure of 8, omnidirectional, and then finally lobe shotgun. There's a whole infinite number of patterns in between all of these. These are the most common and the ones you're most likely to see and experience out there in the field. Visualizing some of these, we're seeing omnidirectional here at the top left. It picks up equally from all directions. Now going back to that concept of wide polar pattern, this one is not this or a tight polar pattern having more proximity effect. This one is not tight, it's wide, it's picking up in all directions. So omnidirectionals actually have no proximity effect. That can be very useful if you're in a well-treated environment and you're doing voice acting where you're moving around a lot. When we learn more about proximity effect, you'll understand why that is a bit more. So the center, that's figure of 8. Pretty clear on that one there. It looks like a 8, right? And the figure of 8 picks up equally from the front and the back, but rejects from the sides. To the right of that, again, we have cardioid, picks up from the front, slowly starts to trail off around, and then has a null or a gap there in the back from the field of hearing. Bottom left two are supracardioid and hypercardioid. And then the last one there is a lobe shotgun. And you can actually see with the lobe shotgun, here we go, that there are these points of rejection, right? So the front has a really focused pickup. It very sharply trails off as opposed to the cardioid just above that, and rejects from these angles, these sort of 45-degree angles, has a couple of small lobes on the side and then a tight lobe on the rear. So with a shotgun, what's directly behind the microphone will get picked up as well, versus a cardioid with what's directly behind the microphone is not picked up. But a shotgun has a much, much tighter pattern. Going back to what we just learned, tight pattern microphones will have dramatically more proximity effect. There's a little did you know here, the question mark, good place to take notes. Polar patterns can actually deviate depending on the recorded frequency range. So this is a crazy, really hard to read chart. This is the frequency response, I believe, of the U87 or the polar pattern response. Various frequencies have different, you can see that these patterns deviate a bit from the perfect cardioid pattern. That's just because different frequencies are directional, are more or less directional. And the microphone design can have an impact on this as well. All right, getting into microphone types. There's a bunch of sort of main types of microphones on the market. There's tube mics, there's transformer mics, there's transformerless mics, there's digital mics, and there's dynamic. For the most part, tube, transformerless, and digital usually are condenser style microphones. There's also ribbon mics and boundary mics, but these ones are the most common here. A little did you know from Neumann is that the badge color indicates the style microphone. So looking at this TLM 103 here to the left, you can make a pretty quick assumption that it's transformerless. If the U87 has a purple badge, so then it would be a transformer based. What does this mean here? Well, there we go. Tube mic typically imparts a warm tone, very smooth. The tube adds very pleasant harmonic distortion. With that being said, tube mics can change in temperature over time. The more you run them, the hotter the tube gets. And when the tube gets hot, the tonality changes, the timbre changes. So while a tube can have a really smooth and harmonically rich character, it might not be the best option for, say, an audiobook where you're recording for hours and hours and hours, and you want to make sure that your tone is the same across those hours. Transformer-based studio mic, so that's the U87. It adds subtle saturation and weight to the sound. There's an interesting book from a friend of mine, this gentleman, Mark Yoshimoto Nemkov, who's a voiceover artist. He has a YouTube channel called The Microphone Assassin. He posted a video just the other day about the U87 and how it actually stimulates your limbic system. The sort of smoothness that it adds to the low end and to the transients, the peaks of the sound, makes you feel very trusting of the sound. It's this thing that we associate with trust. So when you're looking for something that's really going to give you a natural sounding voice, transformer-based microphones are great for that. And then lastly, transformerless mics. Again, here, this TLM-103 imaged is a transformerless. They tend to have a much cleaner sound, more modern, more detailed, very consistent sounding. Now, these definitions are very broad strokes, but give you a pretty good idea of, when thinking about choosing a microphone, what tonality you're going for, how you want to convey your voice, and also what use case you're using it in. Noise floor. I didn't have this in version 1 of this deck. This is now in version 1.5 because I'm pretty confident that at every voiceover show that I've been to, this was like the main topic of discussion is what is your noise floor? Oh, what is your noise floor at your home studio, and how do you deal with it? So first, what is it? Noise floor, and again, this is a broad definition to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of the concept, but it's the baseline level of background noise presented in a recording space, even when nobody is speaking, right? So this is going to include things like your HVAC system, computer fans, electrical hums. We measure it in decibels, right? Why this is crucial for voiceover is that you have one instrument. It is just your voice, versus a band where there's distorted guitars and there's vocals and there's reverbs and there's drums and there's all these things going on that can mask some of that noise. With voiceover, it is just you and your voice, and especially if you're trying to convey trust or authority or something in a message, you don't want that message masked by noise in your room. So when you are thinking about noise floor, minus 60 dB or minus 70 dB is considered good, right? There's always ways to get better, but that's considered good. So quick tip, how do I measure this? What does this even mean for me? One way you can test it, and this is not a perfect way because your mic might have its own inherent noise, your audio interface might have its own inherent noise, all these different things. But you can record 10 to 15 seconds of silence in your booth or your home studio with your usual gain settings. Using your DAW, you can check the average decibel level. There's various tools for this, plugins, meters, all sorts of things, but being able to record that audio, maybe you have a friend who knows how to analyze it, but being able to record that audio will give you a good place to start. Even if it's not a perfect science or the perfect way to do it, it'll give you a reference point for you to say, okay, I have this much noise in my room. How can I start to figure out how to reduce that noise floor? Again, aim for a noise floor below 60 dBFS for professional quality recordings. So that leads to the question, how do I lower my noise floor? One first thing you can do is check to see even if your mic pre-gain is at the right level, right? Later in a few minutes, we're going to talk about mic placement. But what I often see with people saying that they have too high of a noise floor is they actually have the wrong gain staging. They speak too quietly or they're too far from the microphone, so they have to turn the gain up too much, amplifying what's happening in their room. So learning proper mic placement, proper signal level, how to be close to your microphone or not close to your microphone, and getting the proper signal to noise ratio, that alone, right off the bat, you may have less of a problem than you realize. It's just about workflow. You can also add additional room treatment. This can be as simple as acoustic panels in certain areas of your room, or could be as advanced as a fully isolated and floating vocal booth in your space. And the last way is identifying that source of the noise. We talked about polar patterns earlier. If you're using a shotgun microphone and you have an HVAC duct in your room, you can point one of those nulls at the duct and it'll actually naturally reduce some of that HVAC noise getting into your microphone. So thinking about placement in space, if you have a window that you're getting echo or reverb off or reflections off of, understanding that placement, putting up treatment or pointing the mic in a way so that you are ignoring that. All of these things will help. They might not necessarily eliminate your noise floor, but they will help with reducing it.
Jonathan, I have a quick question. It came in from
Sure.
a very good friend of Full Compass here. It might pertain to this. He's got a noise issue, low cycle hum that's rising up above that -60. And he's asking, what are your recommendations on reducing low cycle hum caused by ground loops or other electrical interference? He constantly gets a low cycle hum around -50 dB, but can't seem to reduce or eliminate it.
Yeah, the sort of low cycle power gremlins are always difficult to track down, right? Sometimes they can be solved by simply putting a ground lift on one of their devices in your system. People have varying degrees of comfort level with using a ground lift in their home, so I'll leave that up to you to decide. But usually it's a factor of a couple of different things. One, do you have clean power coming to your house? Sometimes it can be solved by just having not necessarily a power conditioner, but or like a power strip, but one that actually is a power conditioner. Sometimes it can be solved by taking parts of your studio and putting them on a different circuit, right? So if you're, in your home office and everything is plugged in the same outlet, you can sometimes eliminate that by plugging some of your gear into another outlet that might be on a different circuit. Unfortunately, it's one of those power gremlin things that's hard to track down, and it's mostly solved by trial and error of figuring out what's introducing that hum into your system. The last thing I would check is make sure all of the audio cables that are in your system are balanced. Oftentimes, you'll have a ground issue or a ground loop issue or a noise or something that's getting into your signal, and you find out that it's the guitar cable that's just sitting there has become a radio antenna, and now it's piping noise into your signal. So start to think about some of those topics and try to narrow down where the noise is getting into your system from, and it should be able to eliminate it.
We have another question from Rick that's kind of along the same lines. Rick says, my TLM 103 has worked perfectly for many years, is now picking up or generating RF noise. Is it something that would be coming from the mic, or you think maybe the cable, where it's laying,
Most
the
likely
length
the
of the cable? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you're concerned about your microphone, this is an interesting time for us to plug that we do service our mics. By that, I mean any microphone that's been made after like 1963 or something like that, we service. And that's part of the benefit of investing in a Neumann is that when we make mics, like a TLM 103 is considered a new microphone, but it's been around for 25 years. I actually saw a TLM 103 listed on Reverb the other day called Vintage. And I was like, oh my God, it's like, usually you think of 67s and 87s as vintage. But if you're worried about it being a mic, we can check it out for you, no problem. Give it a clean bill of health. And if it does need any work, the work that we do, we give a new 2-year warranty on it. So we serviced 3 M50s from Abbey Road that were built in the 50s, and they now have 2-year warranties, right? So they're microphones that are very old. Now, with that being said, most of the time it's a cable, a bad solder joint or something. The cable's been moved around a lot, and a break in the shielding has happened inside of the cable. So try different cables. Try moving it around. This was not a studio microphone, but a studio monitor years ago. I was trying to, when I was working at a retailer, I was trying to qualify a ground loop issue or an RF issue for a customer. And it turned out that his building had just leased the roof to AT&T, and they put a cell phone tower on his roof, and now his speaker became a radio antenna, and it was just buzzing and noising. But we ended up rotating his entire rig, and just moving it was enough to sort of get it to not pick up that buzzing and humming. Fortunately for him, it wasn't on the capture side; it was just on the playback side, anyways. But frustrating nonetheless. So the low hanging fruit here: start with your cable. Try a new cable. And if you're concerned about it being the mic, which honestly I'm not, but we can check it out for you and make sure it has a clean bill of health.
Would that be, second part of Rick's question was, is that cost effective to get that repaired versus the cost of a new one?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on if there is an issue and what that issue is, but you know, our average repair cost is like $200 or something like that, right? So when you think about buying a microphone and you're going to keep that microphone for 20 years or more,
the vintage mic,
yeah, in the grand scheme of things, and then to be able to say, hey, listen, this was, you know, it's like buying a certified pre-owned, right? To be able to say, Neumann checked it out. But in 90% of the time or more, it's not the microphone, it's something else in the signal chain. The cables between your audio interface and your speakers, it's a coiled up guitar cable somewhere, it's broken shielding in the cable that you're using, the mic cable. So let's rule out the low hanging fruit things, and then we can kind of escalate it from there.
Excellent. 25 years, vintage. If that's vintage, yeah. I'm ancient.
You said it, not me.
Yep. All right. So
all right.
That's it for the questions for this point. So back to the
perfect. Great
presentation.
Distortion. Awesome. This one comes up all the time. So distortion and clipping. I originally, when I made this deck, I said distortion or clipping, indicating that they're the same, but they're not, right? The harmonic distortion can be a good thing. What I'm mostly referring to in this section is clipping, and that level of distortion, digital distortion. So it's when the input signal is too loud for the recording system to handle, exceeding 0 dBFS and causing the waveform to flatten or clip. This results in unpleasant audio artifacts that degrade the clarity and professionalism of the recording. So think back to our talk on audio specifications. If you have a audio interface with a high dynamic range on the input, you don't have to worry about clipping as much because it can handle the significant amount of variation and deviation between the audio levels of your voice. Same with max input and output. Even if your content is not very dynamic, knowing that you can record at professional levels without having to tax or overload your audio system is very important. How do you find this? How do you know that it exists? How do you look for it? One way is, if you don't have the ears developed enough to hear it yet, to look for it. These are gross over-exaggerations of the problem. Basically, I took a audio signal, I fed it out of a bus, I re-recorded it by slamming it through a plug-in and clipped the input of it intentionally, right? So what you can see here at the top is a normal waveform. Oh, let's see, here we go. A normal waveform where it has its dynamics. It's a little bit lower there to the left. It peaks up to the right where the arrow is pointing, but it doesn't flatten off. It has its natural sine wave to it. And when you look at the bottom here, it's flattened off, right? This has been clipped. Even if I can't hear it because my ears are not developed yet, I can look at this audio file and immediately tell something is wrong, right? Quick little note here. And then after this, I'm going to start speeding up because I'm realizing we're 40 minutes in already here. But quick little note. Distortion does not always present as an over or a red flag in your DAW, particularly if you're using external mic preamps. A lot of external mic preamps have an input gain and an output trim. So you can actually be clipping or distorting the input gain of your mic pre, but not clipping or distorting your DAW, right? So keep in mind for that, depending on your workflow and your setup, you may need to look in different areas. Obviously, goes without saying that having a clean audio signal free of distortion is the best way to put the best product forward. So, microphone placement. This has probably the most major impact on the sound of your recording than almost anything else that we're going to talk about today. this is not about voiceover, but I had a really great conversation with Al Schmidt, who was one of the greatest record producers of all time, about a kick drum sound that he got in a recording studio, and what EQ and what compressor and whatever he used. And he was like, I didn't use any of that. I just kept going back into the room and moving the microphone until it sounded like how I wanted it to, right? The same thing is true for our voice. We can talk about proximity effect in this section, but microphone placement has a major impact on the sound of your recording. Speaking too close can be boomy or muddy. Too far away can sound thin or distant. Sometimes getting the right sound is just about how you are in reference to the microphone, your placement. So, and a big note here again that I just covered, placement can often have more of an impact on tone than changing equipment. So what's optimal? Optimal is a little bit of a gray area. Technically speaking, you should be about 6 to 12 inches from the microphone. A lot of times that depends on your environment. Too far away, you get a lot of room noise. A good way to do it is to kind of do the party aloha, and that gives you a good idea of how far you should be from the microphone. Again, situations vary. Quick little tip: if you place the microphone at an angle above your head, so up, and you see this a lot in recording studios, this can actually emphasize the resonances of your sinus cavity, of your nasal cavity. So if you already have a really nasally voice, you might want to avoid putting it there, or if you want to accentuate it, because it could accentuate it. This does allow for plosives, P's and B's, to sort of pass right by the microphone, and you kind of see that in this little image here, right? So if it's up above the head, the wind coming out of your voice passes right by the microphone. A plosive is those P's and B's sounds. They're really high energy wind that distorts the capsule of the microphone. Talking about studios again, we often see this microphone is up, angled, upside down, and I see people recreate it all the time with mics. A little did you know here, this was not done for any reason other than the fact that early studio microphones were tube mics. Tube mics have a big tube. We talked about earlier how that tube gets hot. When you put the mic right side up, the heat rises. The heat rises, it warms up the capsule, changes the tonality of the microphone. So they actually would hang it upside down so the heat would dissipate up and away from the mic and not overheat the capsule. Not for any other reason than that. All right. Putting the mic directly in front of you will help retain your natural speaking voice, but wind is directed straight at the capsule, so you might want to consider using a pop filter here. Again, straight at the capsule. Excuse me. Placing the mic below, again, allows the wind to pass right by, those plosives to pass right by, but now you might accentuate the resonance of your chest cavity. If you're going for a really big, bold sound, might be an interesting way to help enhance some of that. These are subtle, but it is there. Looking now top down, this is the best way that I can think to visualize this. Trying to split the difference there, and this is what I'm doing today. If you just move the mic off to the side, now you're maintaining your natural speaking voice, but allowing those plosives to pass straight by the microphone, right? So you don't commonly see this technique. In studios, you always see people hanging it above the artist or putting it straight in front, but this is a really interesting way to maintain your natural speaking voice. Perfect. A little tip. We talked about this earlier, so I'm just going to reiterate. You can use microphone placement in your room to help reduce or avoid room noise, right? So again, using that null, pointing at the noise. Just throwing this image up here for a moment. For most purposes, this is sort of like perfect setup, right? He's probably 8 to 10 inches away from the microphone. The pop filter is not right up against it. But again, your situation may vary. And where I say that is this concept of proximity effect. So we have, Mr. VO head here looking at a microphone. To the right, we see my very, very bad crude drawing of frequency response. And as he gets closer, the low frequency content and the high frequency content is boosted. This is the concept called proximity effect. As he backs away, it goes down. As he moves back towards the mic, it goes back up. So This could be a good or a bad thing, and it depends on what you're doing. And this is one of those why this is relevant for voiceover topics, right? If you're doing a radio spot and you want to cut through all the noise, the road noise, the tire noise, the horns, all those things, you might want to get right up on a microphone that's going to have a lot of proximity effect. So that way you kind of get that voice of God sound and you're going to cut through the mix. If you're voice acting and you need your tonality, your timbre to stay the same no matter where you are, so you can move around, you can talk, you can engage in the acting, you might want a mic with a really wide polar pattern so you get less proximity effect. And that way it's just volume changes, but not tonality changes. If you want to impart some warmth and some trust, you can get a mic and you can get just a little bit more up on it, get a little bit of that proximity effect, and it starts to feel really warm. So again, it could be a good or a bad thing. It's important for you to understand it and what's happening when you're using that. Again, the tighter the pattern, like a shotgun microphone, has a lot of proximity effect. And then an omnidirectional microphone has none, right? So just thinking about this, what tonality you're trying to convey. Voiceover careers, I got one slide for this. Commercial voiceover, animation voice acting, audiobook narration, video game voice acting, e-learning, corporate, industrial narration. I mean, the list goes on. I could put 100 things here. But when I talk to new voiceover artists, usually they're thinking of one, right? Oh, I want to get into audiobooks, or oh, I want to get into this. And they don't realize that there's this whole world of voice acting out there. And there's a bunch of different ways to kind of get into this. Find the one that you're comfortable with. Some require you to be more engaged, but maybe you're an introvert and you just want to be able to stay at home and read. Okay, maybe audiobooks are better for you because you're in the comfort of your own home. Whatever it is, think about it. Engage with your colleagues. Again, the voiceover community is honestly the best community. Everyone's so willing to help each other out. So figure out which one works for you. Okay, finally, after all of this, the Neumann guy is going to tell you how to pick a microphone. So ask yourself, like, what is your budget? What is the tone of your voice, right? That goes back to, do I want a microphone that's more bright? Do I want a microphone that's going to smooth out some of the high end? What am I trying to accomplish with the tone of my voice and how I want to capture it? Ask yourself, what type of VO work are you doing? If you're doing only radio spots, you might be fine with just a shotgun microphone because you get that radio ready voice of God sound. If you're having a variety of work, if one day you're doing an audiobook, one day you're doing a radio spot, you might pick a condenser microphone with multiple pickup patterns so you can actually change between the polar pattern and pick one that best suits the tonality you're going for. What is your recording environment like? We talked about noise floor, the room, how to compensate for all of this. So think about that and what mic you buy. And then lastly, there's a bonus one. If you're working with an agency or client, do they have a preference, right? Very times you'll see on a rider says you must have a U87, you must have a TLM 103. Netflix has this, for example. Their guidelines for audio work says it must be a Neumann microphone. So just keep that in mind. That might be the difference between you getting a gig or not. Looking at a selection of Neumann microphones, we have the TLM 103 on the left. We have a TLM 107. This is about a $1,500 microphone. In the second center from the left, we have a U87, and then finally a Neumann shotgun. Again, Neumann and Sennheiser are the same company. The equivalent here would be a Sennheiser 416, very, very popular voiceover microphone. I challenge you for a minute to look at the slide and think about, once you've asked yourself those 4 questions on the last slide, which one of these is more appropriate for me, right? And think about the tonality of your voice. We have 2 transformer-based microphones on the right, 2 transformerless on the left. The ones on the left are going to be a bit brighter. But also we have a fixed cardioid on the left. We have a multi-pattern microphone there in the left middle. Which one of these is going to give me the most flexibility for the work that I'm doing, or the right tone for the work that I'm doing, right? And just kind of digest that a little bit. Next section here, voiceover pyramid. This is some kind of silly thing that I made up when I looked at this image and was like, hey, that kind of looks like a pyramid. So now you guys are stuck with me using this. So at the base here, the most important thing is your foundation and your performance. There's You can go to voiceover studios, you can have friends with voiceover studios, you can do all sorts of different things. But if you don't know how to do the performance and don't know how to do the tonality of your voice, earlier before we started the call, Jim asked me a question about breath sounds that somebody had asked in the last webinar. Sometimes that's a factor of mic placement. Sometimes it's a factor of your performance and skill. Do you know how to control your breath? Singers spend a lot of their career learning just how to control their breaths. Voiceover artists, you're using the same instruments, so spend some time doing that. The next tier of this is your environment and the recording space. The reason why I put this in the smaller section than performance and skill is because not everybody is going to have their own home studio. Some people are going to go to another environment. Some people are going to, like I said, use their friend's home studio. But to have a foundation, a deep level and understanding of your skill and how to perform and how to use your voice is going to be the foundation. And then your environment becomes after that. And then at the top, weird statement coming from the Neumann guy, right? But the equipment and your technical knowledge. If you know how to perform and you know how to work a microphone, that's going to get you very far long before trying to solve a problem with new gear, right? You could make an argument of having really strong technical knowledge and then developing your skill into that, but that argument is still the same, that the end thing is that you need the performance, you need the skill, you need to understand how to use your voice, how to do these things. All of these together are integral, right? It's not a pyramid with all 3 points, right? But make sure you're building that strong foundation and base. I'm going to get into some final thoughts now. I see that we're about 8 minutes coming up on a thing. So final thoughts, and then we'll get into some more Q&A here. So think about your voice and what you want to achieve. This was a theme I mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation. This really is to think about what you're trying to do. Think about the tonality of your voice. Think about, are you chest heavy? Are you nasal heavy? Do you have a really high register voice? Are you very sibilant? Think about your voice. Think about what you want to achieve and how that relates to your, not only your performance, but the equipment purchases that you buy. Think about your audience in the delivery medium, right? Why I say that again, if your audience is a radio audience, you're only doing radio spots, that audience is completely different than gaming sound, right? So this is going to dictate how you perform, how close you get to the microphone, how far you get from the microphone, whether a shotgun is better, shotgun style microphone is better or worse than a fixed cardioid condenser microphone. Maybe you have a broad audience. This is where having a multi-channel audio interface comes into play, where a lot of voiceover artists will actually have 2 mics. They'll have a shotgun microphone and a studio condenser microphone right next to each other, a large diaphragm studio condenser. And then they can switch between them depending on the performance that they're about to give. Consider your budget and your whole budget, right? Think about how much can I realistically invest into this goal of mine, and buy the best gear that you can in that budget, and consider your holistic budget, right? If you have $1,000 to spend and you don't have nothing, think about, how do I get the best mic, the best audio interface, and the best headphones for $1,000? And then that way you have a system that is working together and holistic. This next section, this is one's critically important. You are a business. We don't think about this a lot as creatives. We don't think about it a lot with musicians in particular, but also I've seen it a lot with voiceover artists. They like to pick up these gigs. They think it's fun, but you are a business. Invest in yourself like one, right? I'm not here to give tax advice, but it's not always just as simple as, oh, I just bought a mic this year and it cost me, $2,000. When you are a business and you invest in yourself, there are things like depreciation, things that you can do that help mitigate some of these costs, but put you into a better position to be competitive as a voiceover artist. Again, I'm not a tax professional. Speak to your accountants, but if you treat yourself like a business, in many states, you as a person are already a sole proprietorship, right? Think about yourself as a business. If you plan to make money with this, treat yourself like a business, and understand what that actually means for yourself. It's very, very important. With that being said, do not let gear be the barrier to creativity. So if you don't have the budget currently to buy a U87, if you've looked at your entire tax plan and realized that, well, depreciation is cool, but I got to recapture that later, so I'm not interested in that. Don't make those as excuses to not get out there and start creating. Many of the best voiceover artists that I know started with very, very modest setups, and have built their rig over time. It's more costly that way, rather than sort of investing in the right gear from the start. But it's very easy to stop yourself from being creative by sort of allowing yourself to say, well, I don't own this or I don't own that. Don't let gear be the barrier to creativity. Get out there and start getting content, getting paid, and finding gigs. For that, Jim, I'm done with the presentation portion of this. I'm open to questions now.
Yeah, excellent presentation. Thank you. Real quick, we're going to jump to Frank here. Frank he said, you mentioned nominal recording at -16 dBFS. What is the optimal recording level?
So it's nominal and optimal are interesting terms, because they're in some cases subjective, right? So going back to that concept of 0 VU, right? When recording on an analog console and trying to get that meter on the VU meter to be at 0, like that was the goal. That is the level that console was designed to operate at. Anything above that is headroom, right? So in theory, you would say, if I wanted to make that console operate at its best performance, I'm going to send in signal that is exactly 0 VU, and that's going to go into my DAW and end up at either -16 or -18, dependent on what my audio interface is set at, right? Now, there's a big difference here in that DAWs, generally speaking, have what's called peak meters, not VU meters. And VU meters are more or less an average, and peak meters are what's happening right now. So if you're always peaking at -16, you're actually under recording, because peak also includes like overages and includes the transients, all these things that you might not audibly hear. So the sort of, if your signal is averaging -16, -18, you're at a pretty good signal. But voiceover is going to have dynamic range above that. You have all this headroom up to 0 dBFS. I wouldn't say that one of which is an optimal, right? But just think about it in terms of averages. If your average is floating around that -16 or 18, you're in the right spot. Everything above that is headroom to allow you to have a more dynamic performance.
Excellent.
I hope that answers.
Going right back to the very top of the show, Chip had the first question that was in, and his very first question, very short, simple: U67 or M149?
Ooh, well, I I had a few different mentions of this in consideration, right? Think about your audience and the what you're trying to deliver, right? U67 has this really amazing forward sound. It's this classic, like, you've heard it on every record. I mean, I'm a big country guy. You can't go into a studio in Nashville without them having at least a few U67s. Like, that is the tone of singer-songwriter, country, all that type of stuff. For voice, it adds this nice sparkle, this nice warmth, which is great. And that's going to have that same sort of trusting, warm, friendly tone that and forward tone that comes with having a nice mic like that. Now, on the other hand, an M149, while it's also a tube microphone, is very clean. It is a very, very modern sounding tube, and it does not necessarily have that same warm, full body type presence. It does on low end stuff. But that's going to be the question of who's your audience. Do you want something that's going to have that gentle roll off that tube mics have, that make the voice just sound a little bit more pleasant but sounds very modern? It's an M149. If you want that sound, right, that like real kind of like Neumann classic sound, then a 67 is gonna get you that way. So it's really about what your intended audience is and what the tonality you're trying to do. If you can't decide, I'm sure Jim would love to sell you both as well.
All right, another question here: what preamps do you recommend for the U87 or TLM 170?
Yeah, so when talking about voiceover in particular, which is what this presentation is about, I usually try to go for something very clean, so that way my mic pre is not the thing that's imparting the tonality on what I'm trying to do. For me, most of the time it's the built-in mic pre in the audio interface that I'm using. If I'm using a converter that doesn't have built-in mic pre's, like a rack mount line level converter or something like that, I'll go for something fairly clean, like a SSL mic pre or something along those lines that is not, a big Neve mic pre or something. For music, totally different story. But for voiceover, I'm trying to find ways in voiceover to limit the amount of potential noise that I'm adding into the signal. So when you look at these really heavy transformer-based external mic pre's or tube-based mic pre's, you're just adding the complexity and you're adding more opportunities to bring components into your signal chain that have noise. So again, I know this is a little bit of a cop-out answer, but it depends on what you're trying to do, right? For voiceover, whatever the cleanest, Millennia, the mic pre's built into an MT48 are amongst the best you could possibly imagine. They're insane. They sound so good. 136 dB of dynamic range. There is no audio interface in the market with that much dynamic range. So from a voiceover perspective, you're good just cranking with just that. If you're looking for music mic pre options, reach out to me elsewhere. I can talk to you about music and tonality differences all day there.
This one goes back. This is again a question from Dave. Goes to, I guess, points toward the investment in yourself. What are your thoughts on getting a coach or taking classes online?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Super important. It's like anything else, right? If you want to be the best athlete, you get a coach. If you want to get yourself into shape, you find a personal trainer, right? I saw a meme online that was like professional athletes, and it was like the amount of time that they spend training, and then it's a short burst of performing, and then the amount of time they spend training, short burst of performing. And then for us as professionals in our careers, we spend most of our time trying to perform and very little time actually training. So a voiceover coach is going to be able to help you navigate questions about performance as much as they are about finding an agent and getting a gig. So I recommend working with a coach.
Excellent. So here's a good question from Alan. Using a TLM 103 with Neumann MT48 interface, I've dialed in an EQ pattern that works well, but wondered what other tips or settings you'd recommend for that combination. The DAW he's using is Audacity.
Awesome. Yeah. So the interesting thing about an MT48 is that you are able to record the settings wet, meaning you can run it through the EQ and the compressor wet and record that. You can record it dry, meaning you're only monitoring those settings, or you can actually set it up to record both. So what I would recommend for you is to set it up, and you can find this in the manual. If you can't find it in the manual, our tech support can walk you through exactly how to do it. But I would set it up so that you're recording both. So that way you can play with these additional settings and hear how they compare against the dry signal. For me, if you find an EQ setting that works, the next thing that I really might consider is just, do I need any dynamics on my voice to help kind of control some of that dynamic range? However, some agents may have varying levels of input on that topic or not, right? I come from a music background, so I like to put my touch on it, and I use compression creatively, not just to control dynamics, but also to control transients and make it sound a certain way. But some agents will say, no, we want it to be as clean as possible. Don't do anything to it, right? So the reason why I recommended trying that feature of MT48 is so you can try adding in some compression and seeing if that gets you to a place that you think sounds better as a deliverable first.
How would you compare a Neumann shotgun mic with Sennheiser 416?
Oh, good, very good question. The Neumann shotgun mic is it's I'm gonna say cleaner sounding. It still has that Neumann tonality, but it's more neutral sounding. So what you get out of it is very clean, very linear amount of proximity effect, very clean off-axis rejection, and very detailed audio. Now, all of which are not necessarily the reason why a 416 is famous for voiceover work, right? A 416 has this sound, this tone that voiceover artists tend to gravitate towards and that listeners tend to trust. So they're much different sounds. The 416 has this really kind of like meaty tone, especially when you get right up on the mic. So at that point, it's really going to depend on what you're trying to get out of the microphone. If you want something that's versatile, that you're just going to be able to use for tonality changes from proximity effect, the Neumann is great. But if you're really looking for that really impactful, heavy voice of God sound, then the 416 is what's going to give you that.
Let's see if we can just get a couple more questions squeezed in here. Zach, if you could scroll down to the bottom, here it is. This is from Joe. He has a 103 to bring some high end to my low voice. What's the tonal difference between the 49 and the 87? So tonal difference between the 49 and 87.
Yeah, M49s. M49s are one of my favorite microphones of all time. They really shine on particularly on low frequency content and accentuating it, right? So they work a lot on cello and upright bass and things like that. For voice, it sort of it takes the voice and kind of drops it right in your lap without pushing it forward, right? And so what I mean by that is sometimes you hear a vocal that sounds right in front of your face, and it sounds that way because the high end is really pushed up. The M49 is not like that. The M49 just sounds like somebody is just sitting right in front of you. Similarly, we have the same family of that with the TLM 49. I'm not sure, actually, you might be asking about that one. That one does its best to sort of, I don't want to say mimic, but honor that same tonality. With U87, it has a little bit of a presence boost up at the top. So it's going to give you this kind of mid-forward sound that sounds very polished and professional, right? So it sounds like a microphone. So again, sort of if you want the sound to be kind of just dropped right in front of your lap, then the 49 series, M49 and then TLM 49 is going to get you there. If you want that sort of polished microphone tone, then the U87 is going to get you there.
So
I'll throw a wild card in there as well, by the way. We make a microphone called the U89, and the U89 achieves the same thing as the U87, but by instead of having a big presence boost, it has a small dip just above the presence boost. And by doing that, you get that same sort of radio-ready cleanliness, but a little bit less of that mid-forward tonality. So if you're looking for something that can kind of pull double duty there, that's actually a good option for you as well.
So I think I know what part of your answer is going to be to this next one. And this will be,
but it depends.
Well, it's kind of a running theme that we've had in every one of our, Eddie Cooper answered it in a very eloquent way in a previous webinar, if you're going to want to go back and check that. But it says, I record my podcast with a single voice, audiobook style, using the BCM 104. Should I track my voice through a 2A style compressor, or would I get better results with the Neumann interface without any compressor at all?
Yeah, I personally, in that scenario, I would probably, unless your customer is asking you for compression, I probably would not put compression in that signal chain. Reason being, number one, you might be inadvertently controlling dynamics in a way that do or do not take away from the performance, depending on what the client wants. But if you're actually talking about putting a real 2A style compressor in the signal chain, again, that goes back to my question about, are we going to have the gain staging proper? Are you adding noise into the system that you may or may not want, especially if you're just one voice? The mic pre's in the MT48, I hate to turn a webinar into a sales pitch because it's supposed to be about education, but they're some of the best mic pre's on the market. I would put them up against almost any other mic pre. If you're looking for a clean sound that is incredibly low noise, especially for audiobooks where you're just talking and that's it, I would reduce the amount of components in the signal chain. Get an MT48. Your BCM and your MT48 is a perfect pairing. And that's going to really get you the cleanest, simplest. I'll keep it simple, stupid guy, Jim. I want like the simplest, especially for voiceover work, the simplest path to clean audio that I can get.
I know Eddie had talked about investing in your performance, leaving and presenting to whoever you're doing that performance to with a very, very clean, something that they can work in the post-production to get the sound that they want. Not to worry about the EQ and compression and all of that up front, rather just give them something very, very clean and a great performance, and then they can do the rest in that situation. Yep. All right, one last one. I promise is the last one. Then we got to go. What mic does Disney use as standard? I heard of U87, and also it just floated away, the TLM 103. Which one do they use as a standard?
That's a good question. Honestly, I'm not sure that I've seen their standards list, but what we have seen, this is sort of not answering that, but kind of answering is what we have seen is that a lot of these big studios have more or less taken that Netflix rider and copy pasted it to their workflows as well, largely because a lot of the studios, these independent studios that are being used on these productions, are actually studios that are working on productions that end up on Netflix, just like they are on Disney or just like they are on other things. So my guess is that sounds accurate. It's very likely that they're also asking for a U87 and a 103, but I can't tell you with confidence because I haven't seen their sort of rider list. But Netflix is not the only one that I've seen. It's very common. They take those two and say, this is what we expect. We know that these mics work. We know what the sound of these mics are, and we know how to compensate for the tone that these mics put on the voice, depending on what our output medium is. And when you do that, you make it very easy for them to work with you, right? So I would bet, but now I have a task. Now I have homework, right? You guys have homework to go ask yourself some of the questions that I did and to think about this education and how you can transfer it into your voiceover career. Now I need to go find that, Disney's gear recommendation list.
And excellent. We have work to do, homework. It's always good to walk away and a sign of always trying to be better. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So all of these, there are several other questions in there. I'll try and shoot those out to you, Jonathan, so we can answer them possibly via email. Speaking of which, the email that you can use is fullaccess@fullcompass.com. Go ahead and send those. Those goes directly to me. I can either answer those as best I can, or between the two of us, or just Jonathan. Either way, we'll try and get you an answer back on that. Very, very educational, Jonathan. Thank you so much. It's great to have you here again. Hopefully, I'm going to tie you in for another one.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Based off of some of these questions, I think there's some room in a future presentation about talking about EQ and dynamics and those types of things. So maybe we can consider how we can share that with everyone and answer some of those questions live, right? So absolutely.
The one tip that you gave that I am going to re-emphasize is making it using gear that you're very comfortable with. As an artist, you have, I think as a performing musician, you have over 600 thoughts per second that are happening. The slightest distractions can throw you totally off your game. So just use what you're very comfortable with, and then your performance will be much better, more relaxed, everything.
Absolutely.
Love that tip. So
great.
Thank you, Jonathan. We're going to wrap things up.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for everybody for attending. Again, use that email if you have any further questions. And if you had a duck out, you're going to get a recording of it. So we will post that up on our GearCast channel on fullcompass.com. And we also have it out on YouTube. So have a great day, everybody. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.